What up, folks? What up, people of the internets? So we have been talking a lot recently about the Supreme Court and how that's all going to shake out. And I wanted to kind of expound on something that I think we sort of touched for a minute the other day, but didn't quite do justice. And that is just the overall arch and reach of the Supreme Court and why it is an incredibly undemocratic institution in general. And yeah, so my thinking here on this is it serves the interest of two branches of government for the courts to be so powerful, essentially. Because the courts have the right of constitutional review and they have the ability to basically strike down anything that is written by our more representative branches of government in the Congress. They have an unbalanced amount of power, right? But because that's the case, right, it allows Congress to kick their responsibilities down the road. It allows them to say, well, the courts are litigating on Obamacare, when in reality, you could legislate the problems out of Obamacare like that. But they don't want to have to take the political hit for doing that. They don't want to have to actually be responsible for any sort of action that they take. And so the response instead is to just be like, well, it's really on the courts. That's why Obamacare is being litigated in the courts. In reality, you could fix the issues with Obamacare, because I'm going to mess this up because it's very stupid. But essentially, Obamacare was passed, right, in 2011, right? And implemented in 2014, I think. And in 2011, the Republicans sued, basically saying that Obamacare was either a tax. I can't really remember. They were basically saying that it was unconstitutional because Congress didn't have the right to. Yeah, they were saying that it was unconstitutional to force that the individual mandate was unconstitutional because you were forcing people to buy a product, right? And that was their argument. But then the Supreme Court ruled that Obamacare was a tax, not a legal requirement. It was a tax, and Congress had the power to levy taxes. And since then, the Republicans have been suing back, trying to say that, trying to get rid of the mandate. Well, the mandate's gone. So now that the mandate is gone, Congress could just pass a resolution at any given point and say that essentially the way that it plays out is the individual mandate is still exists, but it's not being charged to people. So in legislation, the framework, if you will, of the individual mandate is still legal, but the individual mandate is $0. So it's still on the books, but it's not costing anybody anything. And all that could have happened if Congress actually wanted to do something for people and protect people's health care was that Nancy Pelosi, or whoever was in charge of writing the response to the continuing resolution that kept the government open this week, was attached just a line item of saying that Obamacare is, or that repealing the individual mandate. And had they done that, the case in the Supreme Court would have collapsed, and there would be no reason to have it because the individual mandate wouldn't exist. And you could protect Obamacare for an extended period of time if that's what they cared about doing. But that would be taking a stance on something, and they want to leave it up to the courts. And so this is why it is actually against the interests. There's a lot of people, a lot of Biden supporters, and a lot of lefties, to be honest, that are out there saying, like, well, yes, if we get the Supreme Court nomination, okay, but we're going to pack the court. And I think that the reality on that is Congress as an institution does not want to do that, because Congress as an institution is incentivized for the court to be as powerful as the court is, because they can kick the can down the road. They don't have to make these difficult decisions. They can say, well, we passed the legislation and we're going to let the Supreme Court review it. And then it falls on the Supreme Court whether or not gays can get married, or Obamacare stands, or pre-existing conditions are protected, or whatever the hell. So it absolves them of actual responsibility for making these decisions, and therefore they can go home and say that, like, well, I passed it, but the Supreme Court's a bunch of assholes. And so as an institution, it is incredibly undemocratic, because we're passing those laws. Theoretically, on the federal level, the closest people to the population, again, theoretically, the closest people to the opinions of the population and representing the people directly are the people in Congress, because they're directly elected and they have the shortest terms, other than the president. But especially the people in the House, who only serve 2 years or whatever. And if that's the case, then they should be the ones that write the laws, sign off on them, and pass them, because they are the closest to having the consent of the governed, in theory, if our system functioned the way that it was supposed to. But to give the court overarching authority over that, where that they can say that this body has passed a law, but we don't like it, we don't think it's constitutional, we don't think it should exist, fuck it, and throw it out, right? That's too much power for one branch of government to have. Especially a branch of government that only has 9 people in it that are appointed for life. And then, so you've got the theory of, like, we're going to pack the court. Hold on, I got to stir my queso. You guys can come with me. Ooh, grill's getting a little hot. I hope you could see that. I'm carrying my laptop around like a psycho. I gotta keep my queso stirring or it's gonna burn. I got the heat up a little high on this. And it's so windy that every time I open this thing, it's just like insane open flame. I put chorizo in this, right? It's queso. I'm basically smoking queso. Whoa! Too much sauce. Spilled a little bit there. So I put chorizo in this, right? I've never done this before. I've never smoked queso on the grill. And I put chorizo in it, but I didn't drain it. Or not drain it, but strain it. I didn't strain it. And so I'm concerned that it's going to be too liquidy and I'll have to, like, add something to it. I don't even know what I would add to make it more solid or whatever. Viscous. So anyway, you've got this dynamic of the Supreme Court. They don't want to... so you've got the big idea, which is we're going to pack the court. We're going to, have 13 justices or 18 justices or whatever. And we're going to pack the court, and that's how we're going to rebalance the power. Which, the hilarious thing is that if the Democrats do that, all they're going to do is just put one more guy on the court and say, okay, now we're back to how it was before. And we can just forget about Trump and his effect, and we're good. Which is the most, like, milquetoast, room temperature bullshit that you could possibly do. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't know, man. It is basically. I'm trying to think of a proper way to describe this. Oh no, I'm good. Yeah, I think that in the grand scheme of things, that's like the most uh like ambitious act that they could possibly conceive of. Is like right now it's 5-3. They're gonna make it 6-3. So what we'll do is we'll just appoint somebody who's sort of a lefty, but really a total compromise, so that it goes back to 5-5, right? Would that be right? No, it'd be 6-4. So they still have a two-judge advantage, but at least we're balancing it back out to like pre-Trump being a jerk. And so look at us, right? We've restored the balance. Look at us. Look at us being bipartisan. That's the most aggressive thing that they're going to do. Yeah, and then there's this thing to say that like judges should have 18-year um, restrictions on their service or whatever terms. And to that I say, what difference is that going to make? Like people like to say that like the argument against that, I would be for that rather than letting them serve for life, because people like to say that they serve for life so that they can have an impartiality and so they're not political. We but out of the other side of their mouth, they literally say they're a political institution. They make political decisions. So which is it? Are they not political or are they political? Because if they're not political, then okay, cool. Then they can have a life term. But they are clearly making political decisions and voting and deciding along partisan lines. We know that. We talk about it endlessly on every news channel. It's a constant theme. Is we talk about like the Supreme Court stance on X, Y, and Z. And so like it is a inherently political institution. Of course it is, because everything is politics. Everything everybody has a political viewpoint. Whether they exercise it or not, or whether they understand it or not, they are exerting some sort of political viewpoint on the world. And so if you're a sitting judge, then you are exerting some sort of political viewpoint. You are going to be influenced by the political viewpoints that you take in. You're going to be influenced by the news that you watch. You're going to be influenced by the amount of people around you that believe the same thing, and your community, and who you voted for president. I mean, that sort of stuff. That sort of stuff is inherently built into every human being living in a democracy. And when you appoint those people to positions of power, of course, they're going to make decisions based on their own political bent. Now, every human being tries to be as unbiased as possible and tries to, if they're in that position, in theory, you would want those people to try and remove that bias as much as possible and try to be at least aware of the fact that they have those biases so that they can change some of their decisions. But that's just guessing. Like, that's just assuming that they will be able to do that. There is no counterbalance in there, especially at the level of the Supreme Court. You could pack that thing with 25 judges, and it's still a very old, rickety institution that's got to go. You know, we are the oldest surviving republic in the history of humanity. No other republic has made it as long. No other republic with a president has made it this long, 200 and however many years. 250 years or whatever. And we are staring down the barrel of like reforming our system of government. We've got to figure out a way to avoid the issues that we're running into because of what not just Trump, but Obama, the way that the Senate is made up right now, the way that the Congress is made up right now, and the effect that they have on the actual representation of our government. And so there's going to have to be a more direct way to facilitate governance. And it's just a natural course of history. It's just unfortunate that we're all alive and having to experience it. But it is a natural course of history that it has to end at some point. It is not working. Right? Like maybe it was working 30, 40, 50 years ago, but a lot has changed. There has been a significant population increase. There has been an insane increase in exploitation of people, exploitation of the Earth's resources, climate change. The living conditions of people have changed radically over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And so it is possible. It is both possible that America's system of democracy was somewhat functioning at some point in the 21st century or in the 20th century. But since then has degraded to the point where it is no longer functional to govern 350 million people in one of the most diverse societies on the planet, trying to manage an incredible breadth of issues. And so we need to start considering things like maybe the Supreme Court as an institution is not all that democratic, and we need to figure out a way to reform it. The Constitution says nothing about how many judges have to be on the Supreme Court or anything about party affiliation. And if you go back, it's actually very interesting. We are in very similar living conditions to that of 1850s America, which was that the majority of Americans had decided that slavery as an institution was bad and that it should be abolished in the 1850s. That was the popular opinion. That was the political winner of the time, much like things like Medicare for All are now. You know, these are 60, 65, 70% plus of Americans say that they supported at the time abolishing slavery or in our case, Medicare for All. And in the 1850s, you had a similar dynamic where there was a ruling class, a group of wealthy elite folks that were largely slaveholders and were perpetuating their own personal economy by intertwining with government. It is a very similar dynamic to the enormous corporate conglomerates that we're dealing with now. And the response to that was people like Lincoln were saying that the court was too powerful of an institution. That as an institution, it was it had too much ability to overturn the will of the people. Lincoln knew that 175 years ago or whatever, you know? The idea that it just goes back to that shit of like we are being governed by an old rickety institution that was never ever conceived. The people who wrote this shit never ever in a million years would have conceived that it would eventually govern a population of 350 million people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of countries, all sorts of religions, belief systems, cultures. There's no way that they could have imagined that. It just would have been beyond their understanding at that point, because in the 1700s, a lot of what determined your existence as a human being was whether or not you were within like horseback distance of running of water. And now that's not so much a factor. Like, we've kind of built up the entire country. Every inch of the place is habitable in some way. Like 90% of the country or whatever can get 4G internet. Like, this is done. So there's no way that they could have possibly conceived that not only were there going to be hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people existing in this country, but that non-white people would be considered equal or part of the democratic makeup of what they were doing. There's no way that they could have thought of that. And to pretend that the system that they set up is perfectly suited to solve the problems of such a radically different world is pretty psychotic. I mean, it's pretty cult-like. You have to. I mean, that would be like if you were if America was going to war, right? And we said, look, the last major war that we won, we used carbines and like hand-fed machine guns and World War II weaponry. And so what we're going to do is that's our tradition. We won based on that, and we beat fascism based on that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to fight the most advanced weapons on Earth with that World War II technology. People would be like, well, hold on. You're not going to be able to match up to like javelin missiles and shit. Hey, don't touch that. It's hot. The grill, bro. All of it. The whole thing. What's up, fool?
What are you doing?
I'm talking to the camera.
On camera?
On the camera. Look, that's it right there. Stick your hand out.
Why?
Look. See? Yeah? Hey, go back inside. No, mommy's doing schoolwork. Yeah, so to imagine that this system is anywhere near equipped to provide for the amount of people that live here now, and take into account the best way to govern that number of people and all of the issues that just having that volume of human beings is going to present. But number two, the diversity of that group of people, the amount of different cultural issues that arise, the amount of different needs as far as things like healthcare and education and job opportunity and all that sort of thing. Not to mention building in safeguards for the existing prejudices that have to exist because 150 years ago we were at war with each other about whether or not black people were human beings. So of course there's going to be leftover animus and alienization that is going to affect people and how they govern their system. And to not build in the safeguards and the to not reinforce the structure of a 250-year-old system and pretend like it was handed down by Jesus or something, versus acknowledging it as a living document, making the changes necessary making the changes necessary to most effectively govern the rest of the American people, or the breadth of the American people. Like, it is a rare, we're so stupid. We're all just so stupid and incapable of conceiving things in a form of nuance. Hey, will you be careful up there, please? Stay away from the side. Like where you could fall. Stay away from that. Yeah, the holes. Yeah, the squares. Yes, yes. Just don't fall. So, yeah, I mean the idea that this system would be anywhere near culturally, racially, uh, legally, logistically capable. Okay, take this for instance. Inauguration day. Okay, that's fine as long as you stay away from the holes. Inauguration day, right? So we hold our elections on November 3rd, but inauguration day is January 25th. The leading reason for that is, and the reason that we have a lame duck session of Congress in between the time that a president may be booted out and a new president assumes power. The reason that we have that 2 months of weird transferal of power time, huh? The reason that we have that weird transferal of power time is because you couldn't logistically expect somebody, maybe they ran for president in California and they had to get, I'm looking, what? Sick. They had to get from places like California to Washington, D.C. in a month. They couldn't do that in a couple of days. It would have taken time to get from one end of the country to the other. And so you had to, and it would have taken time for the other person to travel home and all of that logistical bullshit that surrounded like horse and carriage travel in the 1700s is still existent in our society today. And in the meantime, you can go from end to end of this country in 3.5 hours. And so it's a system that is radically unequipped to provide a timely response to the issues within its society, because it's built around this agrarian. We're not an agrarian society anymore. It's built around this agrarian mindset, this idea of like, it takes, you have to vote on a Tuesday because you finish farming on a Friday and you leave on a Friday night, and then it takes you 3 days to travel into town, and you do your voting, and then it takes you 3 days to travel back, and you're back home by the weekend. Or this idea of the Electoral College or the Senate, the way that these institutions are structured, sure, we're fine when there were 30 million people living here on the entire in the entire country. But we have cities that are that large now. And we need to radically change the way that our government interacts with its citizens. I mean, how many of you have gone to vote? And was it a pleasant experience? Was it an experience where like you could get in and get out in 15 minutes? You could go in and do your civic duty and leave? No, of course not, because it's not well funded. There is no way that the infrastructure hasn't been tended to as population has grown, and therefore it's impossible. If everybody in LA wanted to vote on voting day, it could not happen. There wouldn't be enough polling places, the lines would be too long, they would have to turn people away. Because these institutions have not evolved with just the population growth. Forget all the political differences and the party affiliations and the different belief systems and the structure of the Supreme Court and all that bullshit. Just the sheer population growth and the type of population growth that has happened. It's not like it's just a bunch of white people running around anymore. We have an incredibly diverse population. And with that comes an incredibly diverse amount of, or diverse sort of needs that have to be met by people. I gotta stir the queso again. I'll be right back. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Getting a little hot there. think I might have to take this off now. I don't know. I really, really don't know. I was trying to get all the chunks out of it. I mean, of course, there's still going to be like chorizo chunks and all that. This has gone to an audio-only cooking show. Holy hell, that's hot. Oh, man. All right. Yeah, I think I should probably take that off for a little bit. I don't know. I'll take it off in a minute. I stirred it. That'll be fine. Oh. You know what I've been thinking about a lot lately? Sports. And the interesting dynamic that sports present in the conversation about collective bargaining and like union representation. Because you could argue, right, that sports, that players, and this is, of course, league dependent because there are some different sports players that get screwed, right? But sports as the whole, it's probably the most equitable relationship. You know, the NFL, the NBA, the PGA, I guess, but they're all individuals. It's probably the most. Oh, damn! It's probably the most representative or the most equitable worker employee relationship in the country anymore. And because clearly the owners are all billionaires, they're making money hand over fist owning these teams. But the players are making a good amount of money. I don't know if it's commensurate to the amount of value that they bring to the franchise. I mean, what value do you put on Drew Brees if you're the New Orleans Saints? Like, how do you quantify the New Orleans Saints? Or, okay, how do you quantify the Dallas Cowboys' net worth, whether Dak Prescott is the quarterback or somebody else? I don't think you can prove that. I don't think you can quantify that. And so the reality is, you end up like finding an actual, like the closest thing to what people would call like an actual market value for the player. Wyatt, you good? And so people like Drew Brees, you know, like it's not unreasonable to think that the New Orleans Saints are, you know, $100 million over 5 years more valuable because Drew Brees is the quarterback. And I'm fascinated with why that sort of collective bargaining doesn't exist within regular shit. You know, like you go to your job, right? And you know that the work that you do, like let's say that you're a salesman where you work, right? And you know that every year, because just simply because you are an employee there and the skill set that you bring to your job, and this works if you're a salesperson or if you're an accountant or whatever the hell, that the company is getting X amount of value out of your existence. So say you're an accountant, right? And you work for a big company. Knowing that if they didn't have an accountant and they just kind of half-assed all their books and they ended up going through just like long ass lists of litigation and like tax problems and all that kind of stuff, it would cost them millions upon millions of dollars if you weren't there to be their accountant and solve these problems, right? You still good, bro? All right. And so you have to recognize that your salary as their accountant or your pay in whatever form that takes is a fraction of the problem that they are avoiding. And so the difference there is a theoretical profit, right? So if your relationship to your employer was similar to that of a, football player or a soccer player or a basketball player or whatever to the owner of their team, what would those sort of relationships look like? Like, what would happen if you got hurt on the job? What would happen if you thought that maybe your sales brought more to the table than another person that worked for the company, or that you're making all this money, but you think it's kind of shitty that like the front desk person or the secretaries or whatever are not making any more money. They're only making $9 an hour or whatever. These sorts of situations come up in people's jobs all the time. And you want to use your power as a higher earner within the company to maybe help out somebody else, right? Which is a natural, huh? Oh, okay. Which is a natural inclination of people who work together, because you develop bonds with people and you like handle that shit. You look out for each other. And these relationships could form into functional union activity. It's worked for professional athletes in almost every case. And I'm just fascinated by the way that Americans separate themselves from these people. They say like, well, yeah, LeBron has a collective bargaining agreement with the NBA, and therefore he can protest at work. Therefore, he, is guaranteed some of his salary if he gets hurt, or he is, taken care of if he has to take time off for X, Y, and Z, or, he has a certain stake in the success of his team, or the success of his memorabilia, or the success of the product that we sell on his behalf. And he is bought into the success of not only the league, but the team that he plays for. And the better that he does, the better the team does. And therefore, he is incentivized directly to do better and do more, right? And the way that regular people separate themselves from that dynamic and think that achieving that within their regular workplace is not possible is very odd. And frankly, kind of depressing. Because people are able to have these conversations around the water cooler all the time, right? They're able to be like, man, it's crazy that, I don't know, I can't even think of anybody. That like Von Miller got a $120 million contract and then like gets hurt and misses a bunch of time. But at least he's going to get paid though. And we all recognize that like that's smart, that's savvy, that's taking care of your own personal interest because you're worth it as a player. But then when it comes to our own personal worth within our jobs, the vast majority of us don't do that. The vast majority of us don't consider our roles within our jobs as consequential to the existence of the companies we work for. And why would we? No one has represented it that way in forever. It's been 100 years since there was a mainstream socialist talking about these like relationships between workers and uh, their employers. You can go back and look at quotes of Lincoln talking about how labor doesn't exist without workers, and Lincoln and Marx uh, corresponded on multiple occasions, exchanged correspondence on multiple occasions in the 1800s. Lincoln and Marx, very very interesting pen pals historically, and I think that there was a bet made. I think that there was a bet made that more money could be made, and more, just kind of internally, that more money could be made and society could grow faster and more efficiently if Marx was wrong, and it just turns out that he wasn't. That he was right about almost everything. Now, clearly, he was operating from a pre-20th century understanding of culture and society, and so there are a lot of things that he got wrong, sure, but for the most part, his critique of capitalism and his critique of the functioning the levers of economic power as they exist is shows an incredible amount of foresight. He was able to foresee a lot of cracks in the dam before they happened, and he has been nothing but aligned with evil mass murdering communists since then. And look, there are plenty of critiques that can be made of Marx about his views on race and ethnicity. Okay, fine, I guess. But if we're having an economic conversation and the way that that society should work, a Marxist critique of the last 100 years in America would show that you have had an unbelievable amount of wealth transferred from the people who are actually producing it to the people who are just overseeing it. And you have a lot of people who are having their work exploited. It is a natural truth that your work is being exploited if your employer is making more money off of you than you are being paid. If you make $9 an hour to work in a shoe store, but that shoe store, because of your work, is selling 5 pairs of shoes an hour and making $500, then that is your work being exploited. It's just a matter of how much of your work are you willing to have exploited out of you before you decide that that's bad. I'm gonna stir the food again. Oh, I'm starting to get very afraid of the color of this. Yeah, kiddo. Oh, all right, guys, it's time to take the food off. So I'm gonna cut this one short today. But